What if the strongest evidence against you was someone else's lie? For Jarvis Jay Masters, that lie has cost him decades of his life on death row. In an extraordinary series of conversations, Dr. Todd Brown reveals the man behind the bars, a story of injustice, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of freedom.
Thank you so much, Dr. Todd Brown, for joining me here on AwareNow to share this space and to share this story. Thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you for allowing me to do this. I know it's a little bit of a gamble because I tend to be all over the map, so I appreciate you taking the chance and allowing me to talk a little bit. So thank you.
Yes, of course. Well, let's start this way. Let's begin the conversation about a gentleman named Jarvis. When did you first connect with Jarvis Jay Masters, and what was it about his story that compelled you to not only listen, but also to become his voice beyond the prison walls?
You know, it's interesting because as we've all experienced, life is funny how it works out. Sometimes there's this cosmic weirdness that goes on, and I connected with him, oddly enough, through an individual that is very close to him that also is an assistant for a really big celebrity. And I had reached out and had some dialogue about getting something signed for my son from that celebrity. And then I happened to be in New York speaking at Columbia University where they live. And we did this exchange meetup. And just by chance, she mentioned COVID, and somebody she's very close to got COVID while they were in San Quentin on death row. And that's not a normal conversation that I'm used to having. So when it was said, I was like, what do you mean? And she talked a little bit about his situation, and then you start to think about what is it like to be on death row for over 3 decades. And then you hear that, well, he's totally innocent. And, we kind of are conditioned sometimes to go, oh yeah, of course, everyone is innocent kind of thing. But I'm a big reader, and I have read so many books, as crazy as it sounds, on serial killers and psychology. And it got me into something, a book John Grisham wrote, and a series I think it's on Netflix, called The Innocent Man. And it's about these couple of people in Oklahoma that were wrongfully convicted. And it's so blatantly just bananas how bad it is for them with no evidence. So I started looking into Jarvis's case, and I immediately didn't want to read his book. I wanted to look at the court documents. So I started reading through all of the court documents, and it's such a horrific travesty as to what he's dealing with. I couldn't help but be compelled to try to be involved in some way and try to help out. Being privileged as a white, cishet, able-bodied male on the outside, like, what can I do to just try to get his story out as much as I could?
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about the fact that the engagement that you have had, you've had extensive recorded conversations with Jarvis while he's been behind bars.
Death row is death row, and
Yeah.
There's a lot of sadder stories there, and there's a lot of people going through many, many shades of nightmares,
Yeah.
What has struck you the most about his perspective on justice, forgiveness, and the resilience of the human spirit?
It's interesting because for me personally, you have these preconceived notions of what he's going to even sound like or talk like. So it was a little interesting just to hear him talk. And the first thing that struck me is, he's just a human being, right? We demonize and create these monsters that he's on death row and he's going to be this gruff, just horrible person. And then when you start to talk with him, it becomes very obvious that he's just a normal person that has had incredibly difficult and different experiences than we have as, just the people walking around. And, what struck me, and I'm not a strong enough person to do this, but what really struck me was he said that if he were to die tomorrow and be executed, wrongfully executed, that he will die knowing that he's innocent and knowing that he never hurt anyone. And that's solace. He holds on to that, knowing that he cannot control what's happening to him. He can only control what he is doing. And he's trying to live the best life that he can, knowing that what has happened to him, and not what he has done, but what has happened to him, is beyond his control. And that really, really struck a chord with me, to think, gosh, how do you wake up every day and think, I could be given news that I'm going to be killed for something that I had nothing to do with? And that's what he holds on to, as, it is what it is. And there's nothing I can do about it sitting here. The legal system needs to recognize the issues that have popped up within their own system that has created this situation. So it is horrifying to think about that and what he has to go through on a daily basis.
Yeah, I just can't imagine. I mean, to your point, over 3 decades for something you didn't do. I mean, more about his case, Jarvis's case. It's riddled with inconsistencies, recanted testimonies, and a glaring lack of physical evidence. So why do you believe the justice system has failed him so profoundly? And what does his story reveal about the broader systemic flaws in capital punishment and wrongful convictions?
Yeah, it's interesting. As I read through his book and more just speaking with him, I know enough to know what I don't know. And I don't know how much I could speak to the systemic issues of the legal system, as much as I look at this as this is the far result of so many other systemic flaws and issues and failures, from him being born into a situation which he has no control of, and how the United States specifically is so focused on money and property that people born into these situations, I mean, it's almost like the caste system. Like, you are just stuck. And then the foster care system absolutely failed him over and over and over. And he isn't a perfect person, and he admits that. And he's done some things, especially when he was young, he shouldn't have done, but nothing that should result in where he is now. So it's like the systemic legal injustice issues that he's dealing with is something that is at the end of the spectrum that has been going on his entire life. And that's what horrifies me as a person, to think about every failure, from the education system to the foster care system to the legal system, and how quickly people can be swept under the rug, and we want to wipe our hands and clean our hands of these people and just get them out of the way, instead of dealing with the internal issues that are that these people then become victim of. I mean, there is no physical evidence of him committing a crime. That in itself is so absurd to me, that here's somebody that doesn't have physical evidence. You have 3 people, you have multiple people that testify against him, and then come back later and say they're recanting their testimony because they were cut deals by the DA. They lied for A, B, and C reason. And then you have the DA that says, well, that's not reliable. Those witnesses aren't reliable. But they're reliable the first time, but they're not the second time because they're identifying and uncovering these issues and the just blatant disrespect for the system itself by certain people within the system. And I don't know how you deal with that as an individual, to know and to just watch it happen. And it's such a train wreck. So yeah.
Yeah. It's, okay. So you mentioned a moment ago, he knows that there are some things that he can change and some things that he absolutely can't. Jarvis has turned his suffering into wisdom, something he can control, right? So through writing, through Buddhism, inspiring countless people beyond the prison walls, what lessons, Todd, have you personally taken from his journey? And how do you think his story can shift public perception of justice reform?
I think the first thing is understanding and putting our lives in perspective and how privileged we are on a day-to-day basis. We sometimes get caught up in our own world so much that it's like, oh my gosh, my phone battery is going to die. This sucks, right? Like we tend to relate to what we know really well, and then when we're brought outside of our sphere of knowledge and introduced to something that's so foreign, it really makes you stop and think, like, oh my gosh, what is happening all over the world? And it can be overwhelming, right? Because then you could all of a sudden start looking at all the different things like we're dealing with now, and you get overwhelmed very quickly. But the idea of controlling what you can control and kind of releasing everything outside of your control is, to me, really, really important, because I have a tendency to not do that. And it's the idea of putting your oxygen mask on first. So I think that's super important to really take a step back and realize that there are a lot of things in the world that are going wrong, but I can only control what I can control, and then focusing my efforts on that. And then secondarily, and having a little bit of a pessimistic mindset here a little bit, it upsets me to think of the people that have the money and the power to do things and they choose not to do it. It is a choice. My family and I watched the Grammys last night, and the entire show, there's a QR code. Scan the QR code for donations to help the LA fire victims. And it was interesting to me, and my son was saying it over and over again, that this is awesome. I'm so happy that people are donating money and trying to help out. But what are the people in the room doing? Like, what are those people that have grotesque amount of money? Like, did anybody stand up and go, you know what, I challenge this room right now, I just donated X amount of dollars? It didn't happen. And it's not to say that they're not doing it, but how quickly the people with power and, again, money choose to turn their back on people that don't. And I think that's the systemic issue that leads to some of these flaws that we have. It's a cultural phenomenon of me, I. And he's the other way around. He is, this happened to me, so I want to try to do what I can to help other people. And that's the polar opposite of what we see a lot of times. And it's heartbreaking. It really is.
Heartbreaking and very humbling to, so despite overwhelming evidence supporting his innocence in that way for what isn't there, what doesn't exist, Jarvis remains on death row. So I guess my final question for you today is, what can people do? What can I do? What right now to help push for his exoneration, ensure his story doesn't end up, the last thing we want to see is just another statistic of injustice. What are we to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the $1 million question, right? Is what can we do in this specific case? I think the first and easiest thing is to share his story, buy his book, read about his life, and learn from him what is happening to other people. I mean, unfortunately, as unique of a case as his is, it isn't super unique, right? There's a lot of this going on. And the other thing is, is not forget people like that, right? We can move on so quickly. It's like, oh my gosh, this is such a travesty and terrible. Oh wait, Britney Spears did what? And like we just move on. And it's so disheartening to see people have something like this occur, and it becomes a social media blurb that is trending for 30 minutes, and then we're just moving on, and that's not really doing anything. Share his story, read his book, write to your local Congress people and representatives, right? Just because it's not, Jarvis isn't here and he's in California, these cases are going on all over the entire United States. We just don't know about them. He happened to be, it's terrible, but he's happened to be fortunate enough to have certain people like Oprah Winfrey, catch her eye, and then she blows this up. But then it just goes away. Like, there are people that you don't know that have to deal with it. So challenge that, right? Challenge your representatives that you're voting for to voice what you believe should be done. Do it. Instead of, it's the Alice Paul, who I love her. Deeds, not words. We can talk, we can post a picture, and we can hashtag all we want, but do something. Anything to move the needle forward a little bit. And awareness is the first thing, right? Getting people to recognize what's happening.
Yeah. And it's almost like once that awareness is there, then action it's that conversion, right? Awareness to action. And so perhaps it is for all of us to take some accountability that way, to say, once we are aware, we now we should act, and to take that accountability whenever we become aware of something, to act on that something, even in the smallest of ways, like you're saying. So by sharing his story, and for you to share his story.
Yeah, that I'm going to say rage, but that emotion leads to action, which leads to hope. And do we want to save him? Absolutely, and he deserves to be saved. But this is action that can be taken now in this specific case that could help someone else, again, that hasn't even been born yet. Escape this systemic just trash, right? We just cannot forget. And we have to continue. It's not a sprint, right? It's a marathon. Things aren't going to happen overnight. So it's this continual sharing, this continual awareness, this continual action that eventually will help break through and help people.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough, Dr. Todd Brown, for sharing this story, for helping all of us become a bit more aware now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.